anti-democratic measures related to Ukraine. This is antiwar.com summarizing a Wall Street Journal article. You can feel free to jump in, but basically the Biden administration wants to ram through a memorandum of understanding with Ukraine to prevent the US public from being able to voice its opposition to Ukraine aid. And CNN has reported, they reported in July that a majority of Americans for the first time oppose military aid to Ukraine. So here comes the desperate move that actually was planned for a while.
Well, yeah, this summary on antiwar.com, great site. Dave DeCamp, excellent journalist. It's worth reading the original Wall Street Journal article that's cited in here, because it's just so kind of dystopian, like just the way that it's written. It sounds like a children's story. It sounds like it's written, you know, in the way that the cartoons from the 1950s about Cold War, about ducking and cover. It's the same kind of tone of voice that's extremely patronizing and condescending, but really ultimately just about it's very clearly about just manufacturing consent, in a way that very few articles are really just this blatant about it. So I'll just read some sections from it. It says the Biden administration and its European allies are laying plans for long-term military assistance to Ukraine to ensure Russia won't be able to win on the battlefield and persuade the Kremlin that Western support for Kiev won't waver. Right? This is apparently a agreement that was reached at a G7 meeting, or a meeting of G7 leaders at the NATO summit in July in Lithuania. And they say about 18 non-G7 countries as well have signed up to the group's pledge to provide long-term assistance to Kiev, including the Netherlands, Sweden, and other European countries. And what they're really talking about is they're projecting a popular move away from the parties that are currently in power, because they see the writing on the wall. They realize that these sanctions that they tried to impose on Russia have boomeranged and have destroyed European economies, and they know there's going to be a reckoning in the next electoral cycle. And what they're trying to do is circumvent that, cut that off at the pass, and prevent the democratic will from being enacted in these countries when such a time comes. So they're going to basically just legally mandate that these governments continue sending money even after the elected governments making that promise are out of power. So it's kind of a way of ensuring sort of like their deep states can continue pumping money into Ukraine, into BlackRock, into the most corrupt country in Europe. But you know, the way they dressed this up in the Wall Street Journal article is incredible. They say the goal is to make sure Ukraine will be strong enough in the future to deter Russia from attacking again. More immediately, Ukraine's Western allies hope to discourage the Kremlin from thinking it can wait out the Biden administration for a potentially more sympathetic successor in the White House. Western officials are looking for ways to lock in pledges of support and limit future governments' ability to backtrack. So what they're talking about is preventing democracy from happening. They are talking about preventing people from being able to democratically decide what their money that they are taxed is spent on, and just ensure that we have to spend it to Ukraine, no matter what. And there were a few more fascinating kind of paragraphs in here where they talk about. They say without credible packages of support, Russia is unlikely to be deterred from continuing the war, as though like this is our only way of doing it. We just have to if we don't send endless money to Ukraine, Russia won't stop. And, you know, who knows where they're going to go after Ukraine. And they say, they acknowledge, though, right? Here's another quote. A basic political problem hovers above all these difficulties. Will current governments be able to effectively carve out and protect military spending for Ukraine in future years when they may no longer be in power? You know, the horror, right? Nowhere is the answer to the question more uncertain than in Washington. European allies are already bracing for the possibility that Biden administration's long-term pledges will be weaker than hoped or too vague to offer credible deterrence against Russia. So it's, this sounds like it was just written in a basement in Langley somewhere after a few too many shots of whiskey, because it's just so over the top. But this is real. This is how they are portraying this, that, how are we going to protect Ukraine from, the democratic will of our people? How are we going to protect not Ukraine? Because if they wanted to protect Ukraine, they wouldn't be forcing hundreds of thousands of boys into a meat grinder. They would be forcing them to negotiate and make peace. But how can we protect, right, our weapons interests? How can we protect our military industrial complex? How can we protect this tiny little clique of corrupt elites in Ukraine that we installed after 2014? That's really what how can we protect those people from our people?
Exactly. And Donald Trump is now up at 60% support from the Republican base, from registered Republican voters, according to a Wall Street Journal poll. That's following the fourth indictment. Republican voters are not only, they obviously see the indictments as proof of how the system is crooked and not how Donald Trump is crooked. And they see that there are partisan prosecutors. You got Alvin Bragg, who literally campaigned on getting an indictment of Trump. They're not, DeSantis's support is cratering. It's completely bottomed out. There's no one else but Trump. They've had all these fake neocon candidates come in just to try to divide the electorate and attack Trump. The George W. Bush Republicans are gone. They're gone. They might have even moved all into the Democratic Party at this point. The Democratic Party is deliberately courting them. Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, they will work with the Democrats against Trump if he gets the nomination. But the point of this memorandum of understanding is to prevent, if Trump somehow gets into office, if they fail to get him decertified from the ballots on the basis of these indictments, they're not going to allow him to end the war, which he's promised to end in 24 hours. And it all flows into what Zelensky proposed in April, obviously with a lot of nudging from the U.S. national security state, which is the plan of a big Israel. And I just spoke at the Ron Paul Institute's annual conference alongside Anya Parampil, Douglas McGregor, and others. Ron Paul spoke about his opposition to he spent a lot of time in his speech on his opposition to the Vietnam War. But I talked about this plan of turning Ukraine into a big Israel. So hopefully the video of that will be online soon. And the MOU is at the center of that, because Israel has memorandum of understanding with the US that lock in its so-called QME, or its qualitative military edge over its neighbors, something Ukraine will never get against Russia, and ensure it at least $4 billion of aid a year. And while Congress goes along with it and would continue to go along with it because it's all about the Benjamins and AIPAC is supplying them, this is something that happens without any input from the U.S. taxpayer. And that $4 billion goes straight back to Colorado and Texas and Arizona to the arms manufacturers. It's a boon for the industry of one of the few productive industries in the U.S. that's in a completely financialized economy.
It's really the last thing that we still manufacture, right?
Yep. And then you have Ukraine. Well, it's a great opportunity there. It's the Ukraine proxy war has been responsible. Just in 2022, Lockheed stocks were up 20%. The defense budget is at its highest point, factoring in inflation since World War II. So they want to lock that in. And that's what Big Israel's all about, along with consolidating a kind of ethno-nationalist society where children are propagandized into hating the enemy, and everybody's militarized and everyone's conscripted into the military.
Yeah.
But it will be a boon for the arms industry forever, along with the tech industry. I mean, we talked about the DIA app, the state in a smartphone app that also includes this app called E-Enemy, where Ukrainians can actually snitch on their Russian-speaking neighbor, in addition to getting their digital ID, making transactions, and providing their vaccine passport. In one app, Ukraine will do will ignite the world of spy technology as big Israel. And you watching this will have nothing to say about where your money goes because it's going to go straight there.
Exactly. And we have to, and it's not just protect Ukraine, really. It's what it is we have to launch a permanent insurgency in Russia, because that's what the Ukrainian war effort has devolved into, is just terrorist tactics. We're just going to have cells of Russians that hate their government who are used to launch these drone attacks into their own city. I mean, imagine if Russia had put Al-Qaeda cells all over the United States and been propping up, 9/11s. Oh, they didn't do that. Our own, it was the CIA. Oops.
Yep.
And it would be war. It would be war, obviously, if Russia did something like that. They tried to claim that Russia was paying the Taliban, putting bounties on American soldiers. No, that's literally what we are doing, and we are targeting. And we've acknowledged this now, that the State Department basically offers. I mean, it's not just the funding and the training and the arms and the money, right? It's they give them detailed intelligence reports identifying targets, right? And they are tapped into the United States intelligence network that is basically has eyes everywhere, can listen to anybody's phones at any time, has this massive satellite network. It's unthinkable when you say it out loud. It's just, that's what this is about. This is about sponsoring a 10-year terrorist campaign in Russia to inflict terror on their population, to destabilize the government, to make people psychologically more frail, to try to get them to overthrow Putin, I guess, or to
it's what the U.S. did during the Soviet Union. It's what the U.S. did, for example, sabotaging the Trans-Siberian Pipeline, which was the subject of Tony Blinken's thesis. But there are so many acts of sabotage that happened under the rubric of containment, as spelled out by George Kennan. He put forward the pressure cooker theory, that if the Soviet Union was put under enormous pressure, its society would degrade. The government would become the state would become more repressive, and it would have to siphon money away from social programs into military industry and military readiness, thereby fomenting dissension among the public. And so that's what the U.S. is trying to use Ukraine for. It's what the purpose of Taiwan is with China, along with Japan and the Philippines, is containment. But what is Ukraine? What will it be? It won't be actually a big Israel. It will resemble Israel in many ways, especially internally. But Israel has survived and grown partly thanks to the ability, the time that it developed during the Cold War, the lack of unity among Arab nations, the fecklessness of their leadership, and corruption, for example, the connivances, for example, Sadat selling out Hafez al-Assad during the 73 war so that Egypt could be the only negotiator at the table at Camp David when it began in 77. So Israel's benefited from that. Ukraine doesn't have the same advantage. Russia and China are firmly united on this front. Russia's military industry is really second to none in the world when it comes to producing munitions, and that's what's winning the war. So they're not going to be like a big Israel. I think they could be kind of like a combination of Taiwan, like a repository for U.S. military aid and money laundering that just comes back to the U.S., but a cross between Taiwan and ISIS, maybe like white cis, as you were saying, Wyatt, because they can't really compete with Russia on the battlefield. And as their army is increasingly degraded, the regular army, they're going to resort more and more to drone attacks, long-range rocket and missile attacks on civilian targets in Russian cities, as well as these kind of partisan attacks in Crimea where they'll land boats and do some sabotage, try and blow up the Kerch Bridge. And they'll just keep doing that and keep pushing Russia for the next 10 years. It's not
they're going to be doing what they did to Eastern Ukraine since 2014, right?
Yeah.
Which is just trying to terrorize them and make their life miserable, because they don't have the ability to militarily win back these people. It's not really about winning back these people, right? The citizens of the Donbass, the Russian-speaking people who hate, quote unquote, their own government, this government that claims to represent them but doesn't, obviously, they didn't vote in the last, since 2014. It's really about, it's not about them. It's about how do we get these people off of this land, right? Because the Donbass is, according to, I believe CNN reported this, sitting on about $12.7 trillion of mineral wealth in terms of natural gas, in terms of coal. That's what Donbass, kind of the name comes from, the basin of this coal mining area. That was kind of what powered Soviet steel production, the ability to have all this massive amount of coal coming out of Donetsk area. And so really it's about kicking off all these people, getting them to flee. That's what they've been trying to do since 2014, get them to flee this land so that they can come in and take it over and sell it off to BlackRock.
Which they've already done with like the Carpathian Mountains and all the farmland, the rich farmland in Ukraine. They sold it off to Monsanto, Dow, and they're owned by BlackRock and Vanguard. So exactly.
Right.
And
it's all, so this is what we're locked into, sending our money for, trying to lock us into sending money no matter what Trump does or says, even if they are not able to find some legal way of preventing him, sending him to jail so he can't participate in the elections. If he somehow runs the gauntlet and actually manages to win, they want to prevent that from affecting the BlackRock Ukraine money laundering scheme, the endless feedback loop of money laundering.